Hello everyone, it's Nicky Batgirl D'Angelo for The Addicted Gamer, and this is another Let's Play Kerbal Space Program version 1.0. Now, I've done one video on this already, the version 1.0 that is, and it went fairly well, but it went fairly long. I did 3 flights, and I promise you I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to speed some parts of this up. Right here, we're looking at the Kerbal Space Program Space Complex. We're going to try to pick a couple of active missions, and I don't think I've upgraded mission control enough to take more than one of these missions. So we'll grab one, and that's going to be to orbit Kerbin. And I don't think that we're going to be able to grab anything other than that. Well, maybe one. I have the use the LV-909, which unfortunately is not going to get done this episode. So what went on is I tried to build a couple of different rockets here, and let's fast forward to the first one. So I'm going to speed this up about 3 times, and you're going to see me put together a rocket using, I think that's the Mk1 cockpit that you would use for an airplane. I put a Science Junior on it with 2 of the goo containers, and then I slapped on a heat shield, and then a decoupler, and then throw on a couple of stages. And of course, I'm going to throw on some solid rocket boosters. Everything seemed to be going well with this design, except I don't have Kerbal Engineer loaded at this point. I'm trying to wait at least a week or 2 before the mods are not just updated, but updated and corrected, just in case. I've jumped on brand new versions of Kerbal Space Program before and jumped right into mods, and of course they were broken. I do have the swivel engine on the bottom, which is a it is a thrust vectored engine, or gimbaled I should say, so it will move in different directions to keep us stable. And I'm going to leave Jebediah in this one, and we're going to take off, and I'm going to show you how that went. So here is the, well, this is the, I guess we'll call it Jebediah's orbiter, and that will be what we're going to use. So here's the first failed attempt, and it's not so bad of a failed attempt as it is a failed trajectory. I pushed it over too fast, I throttled up too fast, and ran it out of fuel. And that was something that was, well, that's just typical of the things that I was doing. So we get to the top of our trajectory here and just don't have enough oomph to do it. So it was right back to the drawing board for this one. On this one, I threw an extra fuel tank on it so I would have some more fuel, but I put it in the wrong place. I put it in the top, and what happened was I kicked it over a little bit too early, meaning I did my gravity turn too early, and then I kept on having to fight with the nose being heavier than the rest of the spacecraft because I was draining all that fuel back, but I still had 2 tanks of fuel up top, and I just didn't have enough thrust vectoring, so it was back to the drawing board again to make a couple of quick changes and to move the fuel tank down lower so it would drain out and I wouldn't have so much nose heaviness here. So finally getting almost to the brink of being obsessed, after upgrading the launch pad, which you've already seen, I decided to go with this design, which I've had. I'm checking all the staging to make sure everything's right, moving it around because I failed to do it inside of the VAB. And finally, we're going to get a chance to fire this one and see how it goes. So let's do that now. So launch is actually, it goes up without a hitch this time. We get everything set up and we push it up into our, well, we're going at about 2 or 3 times at this particular point, but we're pushing it up straighter this time. And then we're going to start kicking it over at 5,000. And I'm going so fast and I'm fighting against the fins that I really have to rock it a little bit. Now, this particular engine does indeed create electricity. So as I'm pushing it, I'm not draining the electricity out of my nose cone, or I should say out of my cockpit so much. But I actually do get us into a pretty nice arrangement here, a pretty nice trajectory. Flattening it out just when I'm supposed to, and going flat just around 40K, I think it is, 40 kilometers. And what I mean by flat is I mean I'm firing at the horizon and not actually still firing up on an angle. So we get the apoapsis that we want eventually, and we'll get to that point in a few minutes, and then we'll talk a little bit about what my intentions for this flight were. Now, I'm trying to create a rivalry in my head. I like to role play when I play these games, and Jeb's got a new rival, which it's the first woman they brought into the program, and this being an all-boys club, Jeb's a little bit upset. So he starts to try to one-up Valentina every time she goes up into space, and Valentina just goes up, not even thinking twice about just doing what's right, being the best damn pilot around. Now we separate from the first stage, and of course we're not in orbit, so we do not get credit for doing the contract for the LV-909, the Terrier engine. It would have been a nice change, a nice hunk of change for us, but I'll have to do that on the next flight. Maybe we'll save that for Valentina. Nonetheless, Jeb gets the orbit pushing out as much as he can over here, and I should have just kept on pushing it out at the apoapsis, but it's not exactly what I kept doing. I kept on pushing it out from where I was, and I got a very egg-shaped orbit. Now, there was also a couple of achievements that I was going for that give you notoriety and a couple of bucks in cash. And one was altitude, distance, and orbit. Those are all being gotten in this one. Now, the idea was to actually fire this thing up and just do a circular orbit and come down, get as many of the different biomes as we could. If you really want a lot of biomes, what you do is you just stay in space for a little bit, orbiting around and going in a polar orbit. Polar orbits, you'll cover much more of the planet, or an inclined orbit, because that way the planet's turning one way and you're going the other, so you will catch more of it if you want to get as many biomes as you can. Now, we're pushing out again. We're going to try to get this orbit. We've gotten close enough to the apoapsis to do this, but I should have actually gotten it a little bit closer. So you can see our orbit line now stretching through the planet, and now it's going to go around the planet. And I really just don't want to keep pushing it because I notice that I'm really getting an elliptical orbit here. I'm too busy worrying about that and not worrying about this. Well, I'm not worrying about the apoapsis as much as I'm worrying about the periapsis, and I just lose sight of the fact that I am actually pretty high over here. Like, holy cow, 200 and what? So I'm going to warp around the planet, get as close to the apoapsis as I can, and just lift up the periapsis to 70K. And the reason for that is 70K is the boundary of the atmosphere, and it will keep us it'll keep us orbiting the planet without having to keep on coming down and hitting the atmosphere. All right, here we are trying to get turned around again. Now, the Poodle engine, I don't believe, creates any electricity. So every little bit of electricity that we spend now is going to be costly later on, and you'll see what I mean. All right. So we actually get that up there, and we move to try to circularize the orbit now. So we skip ahead a little bit more, and what I'm doing here is I've decided that I want to push the apoapsis out a little bit and the periapsis out a little bit, so we have no problem doing this. So what I'm going to do here is I suddenly realize that I have this elliptical orbit, 200 kilometers on one side and 70 on the other, and I have an opportunity to actually push it up a little bit further. And what I want to do here is I want to first get some science of Jeb over the desert. Let's see if I remember to do that here or if that's something I get later on. But if I can push to 250 kilometers up, I can actually get a lot of science out of a goo container, a EVA, and a crew report. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So I get the science over here. And also there's an opportunity for the just in case scenario. I have to land and I have some kind of issue where the Science Junior blows up underneath me. Maybe I should just grab the science out of there. So I decide that Jeb's got to go for a walk at some point in the near future. Here he is. So Jeb's got to go for a walk, and it takes me a couple seconds to get reoriented to this. So Jeb lets go, turns on his jetpack, and we start messing with the camera, and it gets all messed up, and I start going in the wrong direction, and have to put it back to the auto camera, and then just start firing towards my ship. All right, so at this point, I got everything working, and being that I've done many a EVA, I actually have this one in the bag. So we're going to go in there, we're going to pull the data out of the Science Junior, and we're going to throw it into the cockpit, into the capsule, so we could bring it back with us. That's the most important thing. We go into space to bring back science. All right, so let's get him back onto the ship. Yeah, we can't turn it or use it again. Only an engineer or a scientist could do that, I believe. So there's nothing that we can do here. We can't restore it. We can't play with it. We can't do anything. And that's where it tells us we need an engineer. Sorry, can't do that. All right, so next up, we get back into the cockpit. And I get a voltage warning, and that's not on the ship, that's on my computer. And here we go, let's flip this thing around. Turn that sucker around, keep going. I'm trying to figure out which way I want to point for what my next maneuver is going to be. And my next maneuver at this point should just be one. It should be trying to figure out where I am and how high I want to go. So here I am. I've got 224, and I figure maybe I should spin around the world at least once and get some of that high data up here. And then I realize I'm supposed to be doing something where I get credit for having a 70 to 75K orbit. And they don't care if it's elliptical. So I need to start working on those items. Let's go and take a look at what's going on there then. So we warp over to, we're going to the high end. And we're going to try to get some science in this area now. So Jeb pops out, gets a crew report. And it's high over Kerbin. We get some goo report. Or was that the crew report? That was the crew report. And then we get the mystery goo. And we're saving another Science Junior run for when Valentina does this a little bit later on. And now we got all of that science, okay? So now we can actually turn this thing around and start to land. Well, that's not true. Because this is where I realize I can't re-enter at this point. So let's move on to when we actually get our circularized orbit. So we move ahead a couple more minutes. I'm circularizing the orbit to try to get it within a more circularized orbit of 70 to 75 kilometers up. And once that's obtained, we're going to get a flash, I believe it is, over on the upper right-hand side that should say that we've got another completed task. Well, it doesn't say it, which I thought it would give it to us in like some kind of green blinking item up at the top. But when we click on it, it actually tells us we got it. So we got the orbit done. Now we can deorbit and go through some pretty wacky fun. And what I mean by that is, well, we're going to let old me give you an idea of what we were talking about. So here we go, skipping ahead. I thought I was going to show you some commentary here, but I noticed without my new Yeti being in the proper location, it picked up a lot of my keystrokes and it was unbearable to listen to. I'm very sorry about that. So here I am getting close to where I want my impact point to be, and not impact, but my landing point, which is going to be over here in the desert, because my idea was to get out and walk around, get some material, get some excavations, plant a flag, and do an EVA report, and hopefully gain more science yet. But I had overlooked something that many brand new Kerbal cosmonauts, astronauts, Kerbonauts often overlook. That's early in the game. You have a capsule that's responsible for a lot of things. It's responsible for being the heat protection for you on reentry, providing you an environment, meaning oxygen, a living space while you're in space. It's also providing you with electric and food and water. And all those things have limits in this game, especially electricity. There's not a lot. And without retro rockets, which have fuel but actually can go a little bit longer, most of these capsules have fairly little electricity. And you don't get anything like a solar panel until later in the game. And you don't get batteries, which could hold more electrical charge, until after the mission that I'm on. I have to actually unlock them. So here I am flying along, and I decide that it's going to be time to descend. And then I start to realize that I click up here, and I'm looking for this one. I've got no electrical charge. Oh my lord. And my original intention was to do a burn, and then pretty much use the ship, the electrical charge, to guide it in its descent. Thus, getting rid of the what I will call the service module, which is the back end of the ship, long before we enter the atmosphere. That's not exactly what I'm going to do here. In fact, I'm going to do something that's totally the opposite. And I'm going to ride down on the service module because I'm going to have to. It's kind of like it's my lifeboat all of a sudden, because I had enough foresight to make sure that I had a gimbaled motor on my service module. Of course, that's the only thing you can have. So what kind of foresight is that? But anyway, I decide that I'm going to keep it with me, and I'm just going to burn it really, really slow, which is going to throw off my whole plan to actually land in the desert, collect more science. It's leaving something for Valentina to do. But Jeb's a little bit upset, but he gets to show his piloting skills here. Or I should say, I do. Nikki gets to show her piloting skills, but, I am making Jeb fly this ship, right? So we're going to see our electricity disappear in just a few moments, and we're going to have to do a slow burn, which is going to get rid of our original intention on landing in the desert. So let's get this burn going, and I'm going to accelerate from this point until the landing point. So this portion of the video is going to run at 4 times, and what I'm doing is I'm watching that last little sliver of electrical charge go, and of course when you start hitting the atmosphere you're going to start tumbling. So what I need to do is start just adding a little bit of power, which I did there, and to throw on the stability, there I did, the SAS, and just to keep that little tiny bit of power on so it can actually guide us on our way down to a safe landing on Kerbin. And that's my intention. And I hope to God that it actually works at this point. At least I was hoping to God. So we continue to make that really slow burn. And we do it right down into the, almost down to 20K. And that's good, because we're able to considerably lower our speed and take the reentry at a much safer point. So we're running out of fuel little by little, slowing ourselves down. We separate, and now we just have to let the heat shield do its work. Continuously monitoring the heat shield, making sure that it does not stop working. We're still going the speed of sound. I've greatly lowered our speed. We pop the chutes and settle down into the ocean for a very successful mission this time. And I was breathing really heavy. And here's Jeb, the submarine commander. He landed upside down. And this better view inside the cockpit was pretty awesome. So let's go take a look and see what we got. This is the important part, right? So we come back into Kerbal Space Center. And we earned 91 science. And we've got quite a bit of science there with 115. So we'll be able to get a couple of things. So this was a exciting launch, and Jebediah actually did his job at orbiting the planet Kerbin under his belt, and leaves a lot for Valentina to do on the next flight. I'm having fun with the game, loving it again, and I love the fact that there's a lot more to do in the game, and that they've rebalanced the different parts and rebalanced the ability that you have to gain science. There are so many different upgrades to things, like the science piece, not Science Junior, but the bigger one, actually does gather science up in the upper atmosphere. And that's something that just wasn't happening before. People would have this science module, and it wouldn't gain any science because people would have to leave their Kerbins in there for days upon days just to generate any. So you are going to see a substantial increase in the usability of some parts. All right, here I'm just contemplating on what I should get, what I shouldn't get, what should I get, what shouldn't I get, and finally I believe I settle on these. And it's because there's the reaction wheel, and I already have the batteries. I could load up one with a bunch of batteries, put the reaction wheel up there for better stability and better control over our ship. It's going to eat up more electricity, and we really have to burn our ways towards the next one in the electrical, which is going to be the biggie for us. It's going to be the one that has solar panels. And at that point, we'll actually have enough electricity and hopefully unlock another cabin that will get us to the moon and back. All right, folks, thanks for watching this series. I really appreciate it. And even if it's just a few of you, I love Kerbal Space Program. I love doing these videos, and I hope that you love watching them too. So tune in again later in the week, maybe this weekend, I'm not sure. And I'll have another episode of Let's Play Kerbal Space Program version 1.0. Thanks a lot, and you all be safe out there.